I started working with voter registration data really kind of by accident. When I ran the initial queries, that was my first indication that there was a serious problem here.
Ohio is set to purge roughly 235,000 people from their voter rolls.
It was one of the loneliest moments of my life. I had this feeling that I was the only person in the world that knew the powerful government entity had messed up. This is probably one of the most difficult times in recent history for voters. It's definitely way more polarized than anything I ever have seen or imagined. So I would consider myself a voter rights watchdog. I have worked in IT for about 40 years. How I would describe myself? Probably a pain in the ass engineer. I think that there's a certain way that things should be done, and I'm kind of a pain in the ass until I see it done the way that it should be done. On a typical Saturday, I begin downloading voter files from the Secretary of State of Ohio and the Secretary of State of North Carolina. In 2017, I started a nonprofit called the American Voter Project, which oversees the Ohio Voter Project. I gather the voter rolls of various states and do analysis of them, mostly to prevent states from purging voters without informing them. Some of the reasons that are given by secretaries of state or state voting officials for why they perform a purge, the stated reason is usually that the voters being purged are inactive because they passed away or because they moved out of state. The state isn't always correct. In 2018 in Ohio, the Secretary of State's office, Frank LaRosa's office, announced that they were going to release the names and addresses of all the people that were going to be purged. I think the list was 235,000. I think the first query I ran was, are any of these people in active status? Because all of them should have been in confirmation status. Sure enough, like 11,000 of them were in active status. That was my first indication that there was a serious problem here. We found out that some people, their status was active in the state system, but in their county system, they were inactive. We then went back and compared the state list to 3 counties in Ohio and found out, sure enough, that there were 22,000 people who their statuses didn't match. It turned out that close to 40,000 people on that list probably shouldn't have been on the list. They only ended up purging about 195,000 people.
LaRose says without the transparency he is using, the errors may never have been confirmed.
It took me about 15 minutes to find the errors. It shouldn't have been that way. The state said that they were only acting on the direction of the counties. It's important that those 40,000 people were not purged. They deserve to be able to vote. What is running right now is we're comparing the data from last week to this week's data. And what we'll be able to point out is exactly how many voters have been dropped. When I first started doing this, it was just a kind of a science experiment. I wanted to learn how to use a particular database management system called Postgres. And so I needed free data. The reason I download the voter files from Ohio and the voter files from North Carolina is because they're free. A lot of states charge for this data. The charges go anywhere from about $23 for the state of Michigan up to $33,000 for the state of Alabama. If it weren't for the cost, this should be done for all 50 states. And I don't have that kind of money. It's not completely out of the realm of a possibility that if I had done analysis on the state of Georgia for most recent election for governor, the election may have turned out differently. There was so much purging going on before that election.
He's Georgia's Secretary of State.
He has dropped more than 1 million voters.
She lost to Republican Brian Kemp by less than 2% of the vote.
And I'll block this out. That's my daughter and granddaughter. But since they're the reasons I'm doing what I do in a big way, every week I publish my Twitter. This past Saturday, 13,206 registered voters were dropped. Most new voters were under 35, and most drop voters were under 35. When I started my Twitter account, I had no followers at all, and now I think I'm up to 11 or 1,200 people. For a guy that grew up in Central Ohio, that's a lot of people. Nothing in what I do is partisan. I can determine a particular voter's party preference. There's no shading of that data in any particular way that would be partisan or otherwise. What's at stake right now with the election coming up is really just providing a level playing field. You need to make certain that everyone's vote counts. Everyone associated with elections should want someone like me doing what I'm doing. My family's lived here in Marysville for 4 years now. It's just a nice place to live. The vast majority of the people that live here support Donald Trump. You'll find individual Biden supporters here and there, but for the most part, if you see a political sign, it's going to be in support of the Trump-Pence ticket. This is probably one of the most difficult times in recent history for voters. It seems like 20 years ago, everything kind of took a hit. When you look at the Brooks Brothers riot, that was a direct attempt to stop voting. When you look at the Supreme Court decision in 2000, it was a Supreme Court decision unlike any other. And it just seems like we keep taking steps backwards away from, the American ideal. It pains me that we're even talking about things like this. Power of the vote, there are a lot of attempts right now to erode that power. What I do and how I do it is not in fashion anymore. I've been called a dinosaur more than once, but it works, it's cheap, and it's very accurate, using nothing more than a slightly souped up desktop PC, and this has just kind of become my way of giving back.